So we'll now take a look at variables within JavaScript, and variables are extremely easy to work with and manipulate, but there are a few things that make life a little bit easier when we're actually working with variables. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how we actually declare variables. And this tends to be with the var keyword, although you don't actually need to use the var keyword, but there are differences in the way that things work if you don't. Now, what we'll do first is explain what kind of data types we can support in JavaScript, and we'll go ahead and we'll log them to the console as we saw in the last video, just to get an idea of what they look like and how they can be manipulated. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a global variable. Now the reason this is global is when I go ahead and type var name equals something, and at the moment this is a string value because it's surrounded by single or double quotes. It doesn't matter which you use. It tends to just be personal preference, or how your coding standards are. So you might always use double quotes or always use single quotes. Never mix up the two, and it's personal preference for me that I prefer single quotes. So var is saying this is a variable, it's short for variable. Name is the name of the variable, so in this case it's my first name, and we use the equals to determine which value is stored, and we use a line terminator at the end of every line. We could leave this off here, but we'll keep it on for now. So now when I go ahead and refresh in here and I head over to the console, or just do it down here, it doesn't really matter, and I type in name, we know that that name exists already. Now earlier I said, or just a moment ago I said, that this is a global variable. Now what makes it global and what makes some variables not global? Well, if I was to go ahead and type name, you can see that we've got name and it comes up with Alex in a string. But what about window? Now I'm going to type in window and hit enter, and we can see here that we get an object here, we'll talk about these later, with a variety of properties within them. Now what we've actually done here is we've created a variable called name in our global namespace, and you can see all this type of stuff here, but you can see here that we've got name Alex. Now everything else in window is sort of vital to the way that the browser works, so we can use things like storage, we've got location APIs, things like that. Different offsets for the page, heights for the page, global functions. But what we're actually doing by creating a variable like this is we're cluttering this global namespace, so window, we're cluttering it with variables of our own. Now the best thing to do is create within your application everything within a single object. We can't not create we could not create global variables, but if we have one global variable that stores lots of different variables, that's a lot better. Now we're not going to explain that now, because we'll explain that when we get into objects and how to create your application. But for now, know that this is a global variable, and it's probably a bad idea to always use global variables within your application. Now you're probably wondering, why is it a bad idea? What does it matter? It works, who cares? Well, let's just say that we had a script called, I don't know, let's put this in an external file. So I'm going to call this JavaScript app.js. Now this is my application and it's got my name in it, and I want to go ahead and console log name. So that's just going to output my name. That's what my application does. So let's go ahead and just include this in here. Now what happens if I go ahead and download a really cool snippet of code, like a plugin or something like that, and I want to go ahead and include this on my page as well? I go ahead and I create my script tags, and I go ahead and I include plugin.js. Now in plugin.js, we're going to go ahead and store this file just as an example. We have a variable called name, and I'm going to call this Billy, and I'm going to console log name. Now this will all appear fine. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to refresh. We've got Billy output because that was the first piece of code to run, and then we've got Alex output, which is the first piece of code to run. But what happens if within app I want to then go ahead, or within plugin, I want to then go ahead and use some functionality in plugin to output a name. So for example, within plugin.js, let's say we have a function, a global function again, and don't worry about the syntax here, called output name. And this is going to console.log name. And we'll go ahead and get rid of this as well. In fact, we'll keep that just as an example. What's happened now is that because we're using two global variables, when I now go ahead and call this output name function, it outputs Alex. What it should have done is it should have output Billy, because the plugin has the name Billy. What's happened is that when inside of app.js, the global variable name has been changed to Alex, and then in here we get an unexpected result. So the point of having a sort of common namespace for all of your items in your application, or your variables, functions, is to be able to refer to them by what it's called. Now, if everything within plugin.js was within its own namespace and referred to everything with its own namespace, and app referred to everything in its own namespace, we wouldn't get the conflict. Okay, so we'll ignore this for now. That was just a little side example of why you probably should be doing things like that. Let's just go ahead and get rid of this. In fact, we'll go ahead and keep app open, I suppose. So here. Okay, so back on to how different variables work. Let's go ahead and just get rid of plugin.js. We'll keep that for reference. Okay, so inside of here, we've created a variable called name, and that's a string. Now what happens if we want to go ahead and create a variable called age and store an age in it? Now we could of course do this, but that doesn't make too much sense, because to be able to work with this number, we would have to go ahead and make sure it's passed as an integer before we do anything with it. So let's just take a look at how that might work. So we've got name, we've got age. Now what we can do is we can use a function called parseInt, and we can parseInt age, and that will give us an actual number, an integer. So you can see here that we've got a string, and here we've got an integer. So we can do this with the same sort of thing round. We can pass a float. So let's take a look at a float. So let's say money, the amount of money so I have in my pocket is £5.67. That's a float. We'll actually just change this as well. So let's just say I have that as a string, which shouldn't be the case. When I say money, this is 567, but I can also go ahead and I can pass float or parse float money, and that gives me an actual float value back. I couldn't use parseInt on that because that will only give me 5, because 5.67 isn't an integer, it's a float value. So this is a string. This is a integer. This is a float. Now I can say something like I don't know, available today, false. So it could be my calendar or something like that. Now this is a Boolean. Again, if it was in a string, it wouldn't make much sense. So I could go ahead and say available today, false. Again, I can use parse float, available today, not a number. Oh, sorry, not. Okay, we'll talk about NaN in a moment. So available today is not a float. It is in fact a Boolean. Oops, parse bool. Oh, okay. Okay, so in this case then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to just include this as a bool. Okay, so you'll see the difference between here if we type in available today, false. Okay, so we've got available today, age. You can see that this is a different color. We've got a false value here. What we can also do is we could say something like, let's say hair color. Now I haven't actually assigned a value to that, so let's go and have a look at how this works. So hair color, it says undefined. Okay, so this is a little bit weird because we've got an undefined variable or an undefined value, But what does this actually mean? It's not a string, it's not a boolean, it's not null. Null is a completely different thing, which just basically means null. So for example, let's just say I don't know, gender equals null, for example. You'll see that when we go ahead and say gender, that says null, so this is an actual null value. But undefined is completely different. It just basically means that no value's been defined to it, and we can do checks to see whether things are undefined or not, and we'll be looking at that in the next video. So these are different data types. You'll notice that we don't actually need to specify that these are actually a specific value. We don't need to say, for example, int age equals 24 or float money equals 567. It's loosely typed, so we don't need to declare these variable values before we actually include them. Now you'll also notice that I've comma separated these values because I've created a long list of values. It's probably best or most sensible, it looks nicer to actually comma separate them, and you can do this on the same line if you want, as long as the line length doesn't get too much. For example, if you were to just have two variables there, it might look a little bit better on the same line. But the reason I've done this is because you'll often see this. So let me just go ahead and modify this slightly. Now you'll often see this with lots of var declarations. Now this works in exactly the same way. This would declare three variables, it would have exactly the same functionality, but what we're doing is we're declaring var over and over and over and over and over again, and there's no need to do so. So it's always best to keep them in a nice comma separated list like this, and it just goes to show all variables here are declared as var, comma separated. It doesn't make a difference. Now what we can also do is we can also declare variables within this list of previous variables, so we can use variables values to create new variables. So for example, I could say name again equals name, so I'm using a variable to set a variable's value. So when I go ahead and refresh the browser and I type hair color is undefined, comma there, and when I refresh and I type, let's have a look at what's happened here. You can see that I've accidentally not included the comma there from the previous example. So when I type here name again, it says Alex, so we've used the same value, it's exactly the same thing. So that's how we create variables and how we store variables. These are all global variables now, so please bear this in mind that these are globals and this shouldn't be the case. We'll talk more about how functions, how variables aren't global a bit later on, but in the next video we'll go ahead and look at things like NaN and the type of, to check the different types of variables, so undefined variables and things like that.